Chapter 1. The Hopeless Meditator. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Blaise Pascal. When I began practicing meditation about 30 years ago, I was the worst meditator on the planet. Or so I thought, anyway. You name it, I did everything wrong. Of course, a large part of my early difficulties arose from the fact that I'd led a rather dissolute life to that point, so I had a lot of bad habits which ran counter to the kind of habits one needs to meditate. But also, I had a rebellious streak which made it quite hard for teachers, because I had a tendency to ignore their advice and bumble through in my own way, which is probably why I made so many mistakes. Looking back, I think the only thing that worked for me was my innate stubbornness. No matter how many times I fell flat on my face, I always kept going, largely because I found the meditation process so fascinating. Years later, when I began training people in meditation methods, I mentioned my early difficulties to a student who was struggling, and she laughed. "Well, that makes you the perfect teacher for me," she said. Mystified, I said, "Why is that?" "Because whatever problems I might have," she said, "I'll be confident that you know a way through because you've experienced them too." And that, well, may be true. So, before we start work, I think I'll describe a little of my own journey when I began meditating, because I think it'll build a good foundation for the book to rest upon. My first attempt to meditate was in the 70s, and in truth it was a debacle. At the time I was in my 20s, and having just left art school, I was singing in a punk band, not sleeping very much, drinking in clubs and bars, and taking lots of recreational drugs. Needless to say, there was an eventual cost to this excess. I was barely into my 20s, yet I was already experiencing increasingly intense periods of depression, the cause of which was completely invisible to me. And the effect of that was I began self-medicating with the very alcohol and drugs I'd always used for fun, largely to hide my increasing fragility from everyone around me. Result being, I got caught in a destructive loop. The more depressed I got, the more I binged on alcohol and drugs, which in turn only intensified my depressive condition. My girlfriend at the time sensed the situation was becoming critical, so she suggested I try meditation. She recommended a popular Indian guru, whose organization had just opened a new center a few blocks up from where we lived. I figured it couldn't hurt, so we went along for an introductory session. It was led by a smart young man in a well-cut suit who, with diagrams and a well-learnt spiel, told us all about the benefits and ease of meditation. I was greatly impressed, especially when he showed how their particular method of meditation could coax the brain into what he termed an alpha state, which he described in glowing terms, using words like transcendent and calm and relaxed, all things I seriously lacked. Basically, he implied that the longer I spent in this alpha state, the more transformed I and my life would become. I was sold. Who wouldn't be? I liked the idea that the simple act of sitting down, closing my eyes and meditating would soothe my damaged spirit and be fun as well. So I put my money down for a course, and then later that week I turned up at the townhouse to begin. The nice young man in the suit led me into a bare room with a single kitchen chair in it. He told me to sit on this chair and close my eyes. Then he leant in, and, whispering a word in my ear, he instructed me to chant this word repetitively in my mind for 20 minutes, and then he left the room. Eagerly anticipating the transcendent experience I'd been sold, I chanted this magical word in my head, and waited for the alpha state to appear. Within a minute I was daydreaming. Then I felt restless. I was hungry. My back ached. My arm was itching, so I scratched it, and then I felt sick. Then I felt bored and anxious. Then I remembered what I was supposed to be doing and started chanting the mantra again. And so it went. It was, frankly, an excruciating experience. Eventually the young man came back and he asked me how I went. When I told him what had happened, he frowned and he told me to try again. Once more he left me in the room with my eyes closed, chanting the magic word in my head, and this time, well, the experience was worse, much worse. My heart was racing. I was sweating and my attention was bouncing off the walls of my skull like a demented rat in a cage. When I heard the door open, I was so grateful meditation was over, I almost embarrassed myself by bursting into tears. Again, the young man frowned when I told him how hard it had been. Then he shrugged, and he told me that the training session was over and I was to go home and practice twice a day for 20 minutes a time. So I did. But each time I tried it, I either fell asleep or got lost in thinking and fantasizing, or I fell into disoriented, half-conscious dreams and woke up in a panic. By the end of the week, nothing had changed. I was still depressed, and I still hadn't got the meditation experience I'd paid for. My next training session was taken by a glum young woman who, when I walked in the door, looked at me like she wished I didn't exist. She led me back to the same room and sat me down on the same kitchen chair, and after getting me to repeat the word I'd been given, she told me to close my eyes. Then she left the room. By the time she came back 20 minutes later, I was desperate. I couldn't understand how such a simple thing as sitting on a kitchen chair with my eyes closed could be so utterly impossible. I told her the meditation wasn't working, and her reaction was not encouraging. She didn't explain why it wasn't working, nor did she give me any information as to what the process was supposed to be. Nor did she explain just how this magic word was going to transform me and my life. She just told me to keep practicing, repeating the magic word for 20 minutes, twice a day. I kept at it for a week and then kissed my money goodbye and never went back. And when asked about meditation, I'd say, yeah, I tried it, but it doesn't work. As many people do. Nevertheless, I was still intrigued and fascinated by this impossible thing, so I kept reading about it. But most of the books I read just compounded my confusion. Key words kept appearing: calm, bliss, relaxation, release, transcendence, enlightenment, spiritual union. The same impossible dream over and over again, inviting me in, yet shutting me out at the same time, simply because these things had been so obviously missing from my own meditation experience. I felt like a penniless kid with his nose pressed against the Christmas window of a department store, gazing at all the beautiful toys inside, while knowing that I would never be able to have them, because I just didn't have what it took. And worse, I still didn't know exactly why I didn't have what it took, because no one, not the teachers or the books, ever explained exactly why meditation seemed so impossible for me. Result being, I came to the most obvious assumption. I was just one of those people who couldn't do it. Soon after, I resumed my hedonistic and chaotic life, and luckily my band and my songs were becoming quite successful, which helped to assuage the black dog of the depressions, for a short while anyway. A decade passed before I decided to give meditation another go. By this time I'd left my band and the music industry because the depressive episodes had returned, and they were getting worse, sometimes lasting for a few weeks, which was making my behaviour more and more erratic. For the first time in my life I was contemplating suicide, simply because it seemed like the only viable option. But I was determined to beat this thing. At first, I tried going to doctors and psychologists, but all they had to offer were pills and endless talking. And I was adamant that I was not going to take their drugs, and talking didn't seem to fix anything, so I started looking around for other alternatives. by now. It was the late 80s and the New Age had come to Melbourne. There were cults, gurus, spiritual seminars and groups everywhere. All my friends were into this stuff, so, desperate to find solutions to my depressive illness, I spent a fortune on courses and therapy sessions. And some of it was quite interesting, even illuminating. Eventually, however, when I took account of it all, I realized that few of the people I had met in all of my forays into the New Age were convincingly living the glib and beautiful dreams we'd been sold. When all the expensive seminars and therapy sessions were over, and cold, hard reality had returned, it seemed like we'd all been left a little bit more powerless and desperate than we'd felt before, simply because we'd not been given any practical tools which we could use to help us change. It became clear to me then that no seminar, psychologist, or drug was going to fix me. The responsibility was entirely my own. I had to take command of my life, and I had to fix myself. Having made that decision, I figured all I needed to do was to find the right tools, things I could use on my own, without anybody telling me what to do. And they came soon after. Around that time, I heard about a local Buddhist temple where a Sinhalese monk was teaching meditation 2 nights a week. People I knew who had attended his classes were telling me his teachings were clear, and most important, they made practical sense. Sounded good to me, so I decided to give meditation one more go. At first, the same thing happened as last time. Daydreams, nausea, aches, pains, boredom, claustrophobia, and so on. I stuck it out for 2 weeks, but eventually I just couldn't take it anymore. So I declared to the monk that I was finally giving up. He wasn't impressed. He said in his quaint Sinhalese accent, "So what did you expect to get from meditation?" I thought about this. "To have a calm experience," I said, "at the very least." He nodded. "I see," he said. "So tell me, are you a calm person?" I laughed and shook my head. "And your life," he said, "has it been calm?" "Oh no, not at all," I said. "Well then," he said, "how would you describe your life?" Once more I gave this some thought. "It's been a bit chaotic," I said. "Well, actually, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, which is why I want to learn to meditate." He nodded again. "Okay," he said. "So, after living this chaotic life, suddenly you expect to sit down and be instantly calm and instantly different to who you've always been?" I nodded, though dubiously now because I was beginning to see his point. He smiled and said, "Can you not see how illogical that is?" "But isn't that what meditation's supposed to do?" I said. "Isn't the meditation experience supposed to make me calm? And what about the alpha state?" He laughed. "Meditation is not magic," he said. "Each of us are what we have made ourselves to be. Nothing can change that. So forget about alpha, beta, delta, or whatever you're talking about. Meditation is nothing to do with those things." "Oh," I said, somewhat discomfited. He went on. "Meditation teaches us to experience the truth of what we've become and what we are. Only then, when we learn to be still and we feel the truth of what we've become, will mind and body naturally readjust themselves." I found myself struggling with this. I said, "So you're saying that all the pain and thinking that I experience when I meditate is because of the kind of life I've led?" He smiled and nodded. "Yes," he said, "it is the chaos of your life, as it has been retained in your mind and your body as mental and physical habits and reactions, which appear in meditation as pain and discomfort. And all you have to do is remain still, and your mind and your body will readjust themselves, eventually they will let go of the chaos and find balance on their own. But this takes time. After all, you've spent a whole life creating this chaos, so it will not disappear overnight." He paused. Then he added, "Always remember, just because you feel pain and anxiety when you meditate does not mean stillness is not here. Stillness reveals whatever stands in its way, and stillness will renew you on every level so long as you keep going." This conversation was one of the most important conversations of my life, simply because, for the first time, someone had explained exactly why I was having such a bad reaction to meditation. The monk had helped me to realize that everything I thought was wrong with my efforts, the pain, anxiety, and so on, was actually okay, that it was simply a part of the process of change. In this, he gave me a wonderful gift, because now I could stop chasing my expectations of what I imagined should be happening when I meditated, and relax into what was actually happening. No longer was meditation the hippy-dippy trip I'd been trying to make it into, with me tying myself in knots trying to escape myself for a few minutes. I realized it was more profound than that. It was a process of renewal and purification. Finally, I had something I could sink my teeth into, a path, a direction, an aspiration. And most important, now I had hope. Instead of staggering into an ignominious slide into the abyss of my depressive illness, as had seemed inevitable before, I decided I was going to use meditation to rebuild myself and rebuild my life. So I set out for Thailand to begin practicing at the source, the temples and teachers who, over the next 2 decades, gave me the knowledge I needed to feed this new fascination I'd found. I trained with many wonderful Buddhist monks and nuns in meditation centers and monasteries throughout Thailand and Sri Lanka, constantly adding to my knowledge and furthering my understanding of this amazing, yet simple skill, which has transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined before. It's been a long journey since then, and I've lost my way many, many times. But I always kept going, pushing through the difficulties until my mind and body adapted. And slowly my relationship with the stillness that meditation reveals has become more and more intimate.